Could do something. Okay. We think that we're doing that, those of us who are already Buddhists. And the second two lines are, the Tibetans would say, we're stating our motivation. But we would say, stating our purpose. Why are we here together for this 2, 4, whatever hours it is we're going to be discussing today? So we think why we're going to, we think the first thing, we're going to be listening. I'm going to be listening too. Even though I'm talking, I tell you, I always kind of have to thank everybody for coming to these classes, because it's my lam rim meditation done out loud. It's like a lazy way to do it. I go blah, blah, and I'm doing my own internal meditation by listening and thinking and meditating on the ideas that we're discussing. So thank you for the opportunity. Always I say that. But, you're listening too, so going to listen to it as advice. This is the crucial piece, Listen to it as advice. It might also be very interesting information, but it's not just to fill your head. It's meant to be something you put into practice. So there might be 1% of what you hear that you think is useful. Well, great. You go for it. Put that into practice. So think of it as advice, and it's advice very simply for two things. One, how to help us develop our own amazing potential. This is the wisdom wing. And then we've got the compassion wing, which is how to help others. Guess what, We realize everyone's in the same boat. So we're thinking we're going to listen to these words, these views of the Buddha, so I can take some advice, so I can develop my amazing potential, so I can be a benefit to others. How incredible. That's what the prayer is expressing. So I'll sing it in Tibetan, and you think those thoughts, or you want to sing it with me. Yeah. Sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog sangye charang soke chognam la jancho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drupha shog. Okay. Everyone got their course notes, did they, Miffy?
Yes, I sent them out again on the link this morning.
Okay, fantastic. Okay, good. Okay, so what did we talk about last week? Whatever we talked about. Okay, the title, of course, is dealing with uncertainty. Like we began last week, that's the starting point for the Buddha. He calls it recognizing, guess what, folks, everything's impermanent, everything changes. So if we want to understand that already, before we forget about bodhicitta, forget about having renunciation, forget about attachment, forget about emptiness, forget about all of that, just recognizing the simple, bare bones, evident fact to anybody with half a brain that, guess what, people, things don't stay the same. So, it's one of the main reasons we suffer. Think about us right now, We're suffering because things are so uncertain, because things are changing. And the changes are pretty horrible. People are losing their jobs, people are dying. This is not comfortable change. And again, I think this is the key point we made last week, and it's a key point in Buddhist teachings. And it's a shocking one to hear so bluntly. And I say it fairly bluntly, but it's good to hear it. And this is what we have to try and practice. It's the essence of being a Buddhist, is to start to become familiar with what's in our mind. Because Buddha's saying, guess what, people, that's the source of your happiness, and that's the source of your suffering. So if the source of our suffering is in our mind, which seems so we say in the West, it's all in the mind, and it makes it sound like it's all rubbish. We really have a very different understanding. Buddha's not saying that at all, In fact, when we say it's all in the mind, we almost think the mind doesn't matter. And it's true. We don't think that. We don't think it matters, because as long as no one hears it, you're okay, But the Buddha's view is so, so different. The essence of being a Buddhist, actually, in one sense, it's really not complicated. As an intellectual idea, it's not complicated. It's just shocking. We can hear it. It's very simple, but to actually apply it, this is the secret to success. By changing your mind, you can get happy. And by having your mind stuck in our old ways, that's why we suffer. It's really hard to hear, but it's almost embarrassingly simple to be able to say it. And it's the essence of being a Buddhist. It's the essence, absolutely. And there's many ways of presenting that. I think last week we mentioned Lama Yeshe's wonderful new book, called Mahamudra. We did, actually, and we'll look at this more. The nature of our mind. And I think hearing these teachings, when you hear the Lam Rim, and especially if you hear the traditional Tibetan way of presenting it, we all want to go and kill ourselves, because it sounds so depressing, the way these Tibetans present everything. They sound so fundamentalist, and you don't really listen to the nature of mind teachings until you start really seriously doing some work on yourself and learn to meditate. But it's just very wonderful and very inspiring. And it's very encouraging to hear about our mind and about how in its nature, it's pure and clear. I mean, these are very odd ideas for us, but they can be very delicious, actually. But it's not so easy, because even though, when you look at Mahamudra meditation, I forget, we did a bit last week. We did something, didn't we? We did a bit. We looked at our mind for 5 minutes. We'll do more of that, maybe. We'll discuss. But I mean, it's, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, I remember in his commentary on this same text that Lama Yeshe's teaching, that he in fact gave in Australia, it was in 1982 or something, I forget, whatever year, I'm suddenly going blank now, that he gave this wonderful teaching at a teacher centre in near Bendigo in Victoria. And it was the first time, and then he also gave a tantric initiation. It was the first time one had ever been given in Australia, because that's the tradition, the way it's given when you talk about, when you give Mahamudra teachings. So in these teachings, Lama showed how, the way, the understanding, the Buddhist understanding of the mind, which we learn about earlier on in our teachings, earlier on in our Lam-Rim, we learn about the nature of what the mind is, how it's not physical, it's not the handiwork of mummy and daddy, it's not a function of the brain. And even, by the way, people in the West are really learning about this now. It's very marvelous. I remember reading a book while I was editing another book of Lama Yeshe Zopa's that came out this year, another version of it about how to not have fear at the time of death. It's Lama Zopa's teachings about how to help at the time of death. At the time I was doing that book, editing that book, and that's a crucial thing to understand about the mind, isn't it? Because the mind goes to the next life. But when I was doing that book, I remember reading this wonderful book called The Undead by some American medical journalist. It's not about zombies, but it's his own deep research on about the contradictions and problems, particularly in the American medical system now. That was his field of expertise. That's where he works, about exactly what death is. I mean, and in particular, the whole thing was in relation to these contradictions now coming up very starkly in relation to the whole business of, I don't know what the polite term is, farming organs, giving your organ to other people when you die. And so he was quite cynical about the whole business. I mean, he's not criticizing people who want to give their organs. How marvelous, how compassionate. Lama Zopa praises that. But it's really showing the whole thing about what the mind is, the Buddhist view. So I remember this book, it was a wonderful book, it was so interesting. But because of the problem of now people coming back to life, quote unquote, which is not an uncommon experience in all cultures, been reported for years. But if you've got the philosophical materialist view of the mind, which is the Western view, Western so-called, that the mind is your brain, and when your brain stops, you're dead. I mean, then you're going to have these problems, because what comes back to life? Suddenly you're in the coffin, and then you come alive again. So it's just, there's nothing we can do with it. We don't know what to describe. We don't know how to describe that. And I heard that even in Victorian times in the UK, in England, they put a little bell in the coffin in case you did come back, so you can politely knock on the door, and ring your bell so you can be saved. It's not an uncommon thing. So I remember, and he mentioned all this, and he discussed this. You can't just put it on the back burner any longer. You've got to be able to understand what that is. Well, of course, that fits perfectly with the Buddha's view about the mind not being physical. And I remember quoting, and this is my point of this whole discussion about Lama Zopa's book, I remember quoting one doctor involved in this business of cutting organs and giving them to other people. He said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, he said, but I can say that with certainty. Now, that's amazing, coming from materialists now, because the main evidence, one of them, he had a whole chapter, this fellow, in the book. His name is Dick Teresi, he's an author. He had a whole chapter, and himself he's an atheist. He was cracking jokes about death all the time. He's a wonderful fellow. But he had one chapter on reporting people's so-called out-of-body experiences while they're having an operation, And of course, most doctors are just cynical. That's a load of rubbish. Of course, they're not conscious. They couldn't hear anything. But he quoted one particular example of one woman who had to have such a radical procedure that they practically had to make her dead from their point of view. None of the organs could be functioning. And there was no way from their point of view, there's certainty that she couldn't be conscious of anything. Well, he said she reported the most vivid out-of-body experience. So nobody could argue. This is where you just can't argue with it, When this experience is so clear, she described exactly all the songs they sang and the jokes they cracked. and the things they did. You can't argue with that. So this is marvelous that now people are being forced to question their assumptions, and that's exactly what's happening, isn't it, with all these amazing conferences the last 30, 40 years with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his mob, all these, Tibetan Buddhist scholars, Western and Tibetan, that are organised by this organisation called Mind and Life. You'll see their website, mindandlife.org. And all of these amazing conferences have been published now, and this is making a real profound shift in the modern world among the great thinkers, the neuroscientists, because they're the top dogs in our thinking, aren't they? Really making shift in their way of understanding what consciousness is, what life is, what death is. And this is fantastic. Forcing people to think about it is marvelous, It's really marvelous. So this is all coming to the point, looking into this point that Buddha's making about what our mind is. And this is pretty fundamental. I mean, in the Buddhist one, mind is absolutely central to every single thing. It's not just some peripheral thing. And that's what's interesting about our modern world, modern scientific view of the world. We're really into the hard stuff. We love the brain. We love all the physical stuff. But psychology, that's the lowest of the totem pole, I think, in our culture, because, we don't like to trust the subjective. But that's the point about the Buddha's view. The subjective, meaning what goes on in your mind, that you have to become familiar with, is absolutely central to every single thing from A to Z in Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist metaphysics, Buddhist psychology, Buddhist epistemology, whatever the word is. All of that, mind is the central player. So we've got to know what it is, and we've got to know where it comes from, what its source is, because this is central. You really can't understand Buddhism properly if you don't understand this, even intellectually. And this is the massive stumbling block for most of us in the West. I mean, people don't even like to talk about karma. I mean, many Buddhists are wonderful people who do mindfulness or whatever. So, I remember there's a group of people I go to see who are like social worker Buddhists. They're doing wonderful work, helping poor people, all sorts of things. But when they do their teachings, they don't even mention the word karma, because almost they're embarrassed by it, because it seems such a silly thing to quote unquote believe in the West, or that you come from another life. It's like the sort of hippies made it up in the 1960s. But this is crucial and central and fundamental to the understanding of Buddhism. It's utterly necessary. That's why I always talk about it. It's just foolish just to go on about being mindful and watching your breath, thinking you're a nice Buddhist. That's like a tenth of a percent of 1% of Buddhist teachings are that. So we've really got the big picture is so important. Of course, we don't have to like it, don't have to believe in it, but it's good to hear it. We're all grown-ups. We're not babies. So as like I'm talking, so as Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra, this wonderful way of talking about the mind that can be so inspiring for us. When we hear that, forget even if it's not physical, but the fact that our mind is not set in stone, that we can change our thoughts. And when we understand what thoughts are in Buddhism, that's the level of the mind that we function at right now. We've got much subtler levels of mind, according to the Buddhist view, which we don't posit as existing in our culture, but the grosser level that we function at is conceptuality. All our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, our anger, our rage, our lust, our despair, our joy, guess what? It's all rooted at the level we function at day to day on the basis of this bag of bones here, at the very grossest level of our mind. That's conceptuality. It is and concepts are thoughts. And guess what? We can change thoughts. And this is the part that's already powerful, that the nature of our mind, ultimately, everything is that it's empty of inherent nature, empty of existing inherently, and let's discuss that at some point, because all the teachings in Buddhism lead to that one. But even at the conventional level, to know that clarity, as Lama Teshe talks in Mahamudra, that the nature of your mind is clear, meaning not physical. And the point about it is, as Lama talks about, we discussed last week, I think, when we learn about how the mind functions, we learn the epistemological model of the mind, how it functions. And of course, when we remember, like I always quote this endlessly, it's so marvelous to remember this, what's the source of all this information? Buddha didn't make it up 2,500 years ago. He didn't come out of some kind of rainbow. He came out of this amazing tradition. Always I quote, as His Holiness said, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who were the ones who began the investigation into the nature of self and indeed into the nature of mind. That's their expertise, with this amazing technique called single point of concentration, where they learn to access the subtle level of their own mind, their own capacity for cognition, which is the mind at these subtler levels, and it's there where we start to taste the power of our own mind, taste the deliciousness of our own mind. Because our own mind, when it's subdued, when the mind is gone even temporarily in single point of concentration, and Lama talks about this in Mahamudra, this amazing technique made up by these Indians more than 3,000 years ago, which we can use finally to really unpack and unravel the contents of this consciousness of ours, this mind of ours, these thoughts and feelings and emotions of ours. This is the secret to success. This is the main method of being a Buddhist. This is where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa puts it. Tibetans point here when they say mind. They don't point up there, They say here. This is the mind. Consciousness, thoughts, feelings, emotions. And they're basically the level we function at, and they're deep habitual ones, and we come fully programmed into this life with these habits. That they're basically conceptual stories. They're thoughts. Thousands of them, way subtle level, thousands and thousands and thousands of thoughts, locked together in this kind of soup of emotion, So this is where, when we hear the Buddha's view, the more we accept and take for granted that I got this from my mother or father, or with respect from a creator, the more we take the view that it's just all physical, the more we take the view that how I think and feel and act and experience things is coming from the outside, which are the views that are posited by the materialist view. It's just the way it is, and it's the world we live in, and everybody thinks like this. The more we buy into those views, then the more victim we become, the more hopeless, the more despairing. Because, we don't get in there with a knife to cut pieces of our brain out. We tried it back in the 1930s and they called it lobotomy. And what do? We turn people into veggies. So we know that doesn't work. But the more we think that without really using our logic to try and think of the Buddhist view and put that as an alternative presentation and then apply that one, the more we buy into the other view, the more hopeless we become, because we think, I didn't ask to get born, it's not my fault, this is who I am, no, I don't know why I've got anger and jealousy and despair and depression and fear, don't ask me, I don't remember anything. We come into this life program with it. So of course if we come into this life program with it, we assume it comes from mummy, daddy, grandpa, grandma. And of course if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you don't want to blame God for it, unless you're Italian. I always point this out, and sometimes Italians get upset with me. Rosanna, you must have Italian. Are you Italian background? Rosanna's in New York. Well, I know. I remember Lama Yeshe, actually, when he was in Italy back in the early 80s, and his friend Geshe Jampa Gyatso, who was the teacher at our big centre in Italy at the time, and Lama was visiting him in the hospital, and he was in the ward with all the men, right? And the Italian boys were translating to Lama Yeshe all the terrible things that the men were saying about God. God is a pig. Our ladies are whore. I'm sure there are worse. But I remember meeting one Argentinian, he said, we're even worse than the Italians. Anyway, you don't like to blame God. We were Catholics in Melbourne. You'd never dare blame God. That would be a terrible thing to do. But the logic is, if you didn't ask to get born and he made you, don't be, it's not illogical, except I'm not trying to be controversial. But the Buddhist view, if you even listen to the teachings, even hypothesize this idea that your consciousness is not physical, is not a function of the brain, it's intimately connected to your brain, you can't argue with that. The mind and the body are totally, interdependently, intimately connected. This is really obvious. Everyone can approve that. But to recognize that your consciousness is not the same source as your body. When you track your mind back to the first second of conception, you track it the second before that, where was it? It was not in your mother's sperm. It was not in your father and daddy's mummy and daddy's egg and sperm. It was not in, But if you're a Buddhist, you posit this possibility that your consciousness was a second before that, and a second before that, and a second before that. This unbroken chain of mental moments. And so the nature of mind not being physical, and not being a soul. That's the other point. The only alternative in the world, generally, you've got a soul, which means you're a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or something, or you're a materialist, and you just have the body and the body, that's it. No, Buddha's got this third alternative view, if you like, thinking of it that way. Consciousness, he uses the word mind and consciousness. And that refers to the grosser level, anger, mania, being good at music, being good at football, love, compassion, kindness, joy, bliss, paranoia, you name it, all the way to the subtlest level, your unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, to the subtlest level of your being. There's no word in Buddhism. He doesn't use another piece. There's not a third component, body, mind, and spirit. Not like that. But he's referring to the mind. The mind has got these subtler levels. When we say body and mind body and mind in the West, we mean the thinking process. And then we have a subtler thing called a soul. For Buddhism, it's all called mind. It's all called consciousness. There are grosser levels and there are subtler levels of mind. And it's not physical. In its nature, it's not physical. It's a powerful thing to think about, because the implications of it are the point, Second, this consciousness of ours, as Lama talks about in Mahamudra, that in its nature, It's clear and pure. Now, what does that mean? Because we can easily misunderstand. If we think our true nature is that it's pure and clear, we think, oh, I must have been pure and clear at some point in the past, and then I got dirty again. Somehow I got dirty. No, it can't be that way. I remember, never mind all that. So this is a very powerful point. So this is where Buddha talks about we've all got Buddha nature. If you're on the Mahayana path, the Buddha would say we've all got Buddha nature. We all possess Buddha nature. So when we say I possess Buddha nature, which part of me? Because me is made of body and me is made of mind. So it's my mind that possesses the potential to become fully developed in goodness and the potential to be completely free of all the rubbish. Like I mentioned last week, and I always mention this, is really wonderful, it's very simple. The etymology of the word Buddha is very tasty. Bud implies the utter eradication from our very being, from our mind, of all rubbish, from all ego, fears, jealousy, depression, despair, anxiety, grasping at things not being certain, all these mistakes in our mind, Buddha says, which we think are at the core of our being. That's our big problem. We assume these are the core of our being. There's not a single view in modern psychology or in neuroscience that would suggest that there's some parts of us that are like bells and whistles that we've added that we don't need. We give equal status, don't we? This is a powerful point. We give equal status, don't we, to in what's going on in our mind, to both anger and neurosis and love and kindness. We assume that they're normal parts of a normal person. Buddha disagrees fundamentally. They are parts of a normal person. Joy in the universe, we call samsaric, we've all got them. But his amazing, outrageous, over-the-top, radical finding, Buddha's finding, is that this stuff, and this is the meaning of the mind being pure, is not at the core of our being. Is not at the core of our being. Is therefore can be removed. That's the meaning of the implication of the Bud, the first syllable. Second syllable, we can develop to perfection all the goodness in us. So this is where, again, we come to the Buddhist view of the mind, which we've been talking about, which is on the face of it really marvelous and really simple. There are three categories of types of thoughts and feelings and emotions, just three. Neurotic, deluded, I-based, fear-based, rubbish ones that we can get rid of. And why should we? Because guess what, honey? They're the cause of your suffering. They're not at the core of your being. Two, we can, the positive stuff, the good stuff that we know is the nice stuff, love, compassion, kindness, generosity, intelligence, that stuff's at the core of our being. That's who we really are. This is the conventional nature of our mind. There's the virtues in our mind. These we can develop to perfection. I mean, this is an outrageous idea. This is outrageous, and this is the meaning of the word Buddha. So that's the end result of this job. So it implies the job to get done, doesn't it? It implies the methodology. Better know your mind, baby. And then even hearing, that even thinking and hearing and positing that goodness in you, intelligence and love and courage and bravery and self-confidence and all that's the stuff that causes happiness, and that's the stuff that we can grow. This is encouraging. It's really encouraging. It's really encouraging. And then the other stuff, which is there, absolutely is playing its role. It's making me totally miserable and caused me to make a mess of my life. This stuff I can get rid of. Just even thinking that is so outrageous, it's so marvelous, it's so optimistic. But if we hear, like I had a friend recently emailing me, talking about his own problems. We've all got problems, and saying basically his therapist said that you just accept, this is how the way it is. You're probably not going to change this, he said. I mean, that's extremely depressing. To even posit that possibility, which is ironically interesting, is that that's what we think anyway. That's what we think anyway. And that's what impermanence means. But don't just think, oh yeah, isn't it nice, things change. How interesting, how boring. Tell me something more interesting, Buddha. No, it's profound, the implication of that. Forget realizing emptiness, the ultimate nature of our mind. The conventional nature is, guess what? It's a constant process of flux and change. There's nothing set in stone. It's a profound teaching. Even that is so encouraging. But we say, oh, well, probably his therapist said to him, you're going to live with this for the rest of your life. You're not going to be able to change it. Because why? Because we think the problem out there, what happened to him when he was 2 and 5 or 7 or 10 or whatever, is the thing that you can't change. You can't change that, that's a fact. But guess what, honey? We can change our view of it. And that's the mind. That's the mind. There's nothing we can't change in the mind. This is so encouraging. And it's expressed in great detail in the Buddhist literature. It's just profound and marvelous to think about it, and it's encouraging. Then we have much more courage when the dramas happen. we can learn, we can reinterpret these dramas. And that's why I always mention people in prison. Such a classic example of where they are in a supposedly immutable situation, and at a relative level, it's pretty immutable, baby. You do not have a key, you cannot escape. You know, and there's so many people in prison, let's say in America, it's utterly depressing. And all these young people since they're kids, being locked into this wretched system, lost in this system. Millions lost in this system with no money and no lawyers, and they're just lost, you know, never find a way to get out again. That's immutable, pretty immutable. Well, people in that situation who have learned to change their minds, they become happy human beings. Because happiness is the way you see things, is your interpretation. It's almost such a simple idea, but this is what Buddha's been telling us very quietly, very nicely for 2,500 years, you know. So the nature of our mind means in its nature, the negative stuff is not at the core of our being. And why are we caring about that? Because the negative stuff, the negative thoughts, the negative interpretations, the anger, the fears, the jealousy, the depression, you name it, these are the source of our pain. Sure, COVID-19 is not fun. Sure, what happened?
I've got a question for you when you're ready.
Oh, Miffy's the best at questions. I know whenever I come to Brisbane, she's always sitting there over on my right in the front row, and I can guarantee Miffy has questions. So go on, Miffy. And she asks them, and she asks them for everybody else. That's what she does, because she knows the answers already.
Well, I do have a question from Robin Bean. So she's asking about, you know, the nature of our mind when we grow up in a Christian culture, even if we aren't actually Christian, there is this kind of Abrahamic residue that we have of feeling that we are sinful.
Yes.
And so how can we kind of transform that when it's kind of this really deep-seated kind of guilt and doubt?
Well, I mean, this is what's interesting. You know, don't blame your Jewish mummy or your Catholic mummy for feeling this way. Buddha's point is we come programmed with that view from our own rubbish in the past. So it's true. This is why we, I mean, forget whether you're Jewish or Christian. Forget that. Whether you're a materialist suffering just the same way, we've got this innate belief, instinctive belief, as if it's the truth, that this bad stuff is at the core of my being, and that's rooted, it seems to me, and it's expressed in Christian philosophy and psychology. And I'm not criticizing. I mean, I loved being a Catholic. I love God. I have great respect for anybody, any religion. I'm not criticizing, but philosophically, this is a really powerful point. And this is so that, you know, the root of that one, the root of the, as you said, guilt or whatever, is this dualistic view. The Buddhists would call it the dualistic philosophical view, which no one teaches us. It is in the core of our being, and it is a product of the root delusion in the mind, which we will talk about, these delusions in our mind. So the root delusion, this ego grasping, that has this powerful belief of a solid, concrete, unchanging me, and solid, concrete, unchanging everything else, that's already the view our mind is imbued with because of ego grasping, because of this misconception. So then you can almost argue the other way around, that the dualistic views in some religious philosophical views, like Christianity, like, you know, Islam, whatever, one of the philosophical views is the one that you're made by someone else. And therefore, because God is the creator, and I'm not criticizing this view, it's a very fascinating philosophy. God is the creator, right? There's a being who is perfect, who is beginningless, who is permanent and unchanging, who has no cause, but is the source. That being, that we usually refer to him as he, we know that, he, whatever you like, is the source of me and the universe. So if that's true, if there is a being who is a creator, who is the source of the universe and the rules and everything else, then, as I always quote this, I asked my Jesuit priest friend, well, by definition, what is a negative action? What is a sin? By definition, he said, it is going against God's will. So what that means is, when we look at it from the negative point of view, I'm not criticizing Christianity, I'm not criticizing that, but the way we misinterpret that and make it concrete and solid, so the consequence we have of that is I'm a bad person. So if I go against God's will, that is by definition what a sin is. The priest said there's some aspect of natural law that people don't like getting killed, for example, but the Christian view is that the main thing that makes it negative is because God said. So naturally, because we then have this, whether it's even the Christian view, look at the materialist view. In my mother's household, she says, don't do that. And I, being a smarty pants, will say, why not? We know her answer, it's the same as God. Because I say so. So then it's the same. So we have that view of morality deep in our bones. We got born with this. And out of that view, this dualistic view, we create this very rock solid good and bad. You are this, you do that. If you don't do this, you'll get punished. If you do this, you'll get rewarded. And because we all want to be loved and don't want to be hated, we'll all try to be good girls. Or if we're going to be naughty, this is the consequence of this mistaken view. If we're naughty, as long as no one finds out, as long as no one catches me, we'll think, oh, I got away with that. So this for the Buddha is schizophrenic, So we do have that deep instinctive view. We do have, and then we interpret it when I'm being punished, I must be a naughty girl. And then what we think is, and this is getting us to emptiness, when we think I am a naughty girl, I am bad, we believe that badness is at the core of my being. Now the Christian teachings do say that we have got sin. Well, Buddhism would agree we've got negative. We come into this life programmed with our past habits. Have a look at the world, people. Have you noticed people do bad things? Of course it's in us. But the difference is, but it's not so much a difference even. No, there's not much of a difference there. The difference in interpretation of why you're bad is because God said. But you can get God to forgive you, and you can go to heaven and be in bliss with God. That's a pretty good teaching. I mean, why are people complaining? I think it's an amazing teaching. I mean, that's incredible. Do God's will, and you'll become oneness with God, and when you die, you go to heaven. I don't think that's a problem. I think that's a pretty upbeat kind of view of the world, frankly. But I never know what you Jews think. I mean, I asked 47 Jews, including in Israel, and they've all got a different view. So I don't know. I give up on the Jews. But the Christians are pretty straightforward. So there's really, and that's a pretty but the materialist view, with respect, we're all materialists, but the materialist view is your mind is your brain, you're made by your mother, and you turn into dust, and the best you can get is to have a happy person. And what do people say? The peak of happiness in this life is friends and health. You have good health, and you have good friends and family, and then you die. I mean, I find that a very depressing view, frankly. That's a depressing view. The Christian one's not so depressing, frankly. I can disagree with the philosophy, but it's a pretty upbeat view that you've got the chance to completely be purified and go to heaven with God. I mean, I don't know why Christians should be unhappy. That's a marvelous teaching, but you've got to do God's will. That's the difficulty, Not a problem, but there's a good solution. I mean, Muslims, devoted Christians, they're happy people. I always remember one time one of those flights in Malaysia went down in the ocean, right? And they're mostly Muslims in the aeroplane, and one Muslim couple were asked how did they feel about the death of their daughter who died in the crash. And they said, we are peaceful. She belongs to God. He has taken her back. I mean, that's profound philosophy. I would never criticize that philosophy. It's just not Buddhist, that's all. So there's purity there. It's got a different interpretation, of course. I think it's a very upbeat view, quite frankly. I wouldn't criticize it. So if you are a Christian, I don't think you should be depressed. You should be very happy and excited and want to become oneness with God. But you can't have it both ways. You can't think you like God, but don't want to do God's will. You can't think that. That's schizophrenic. So you've got to make a call on that one, frankly.
So, Venerable, Robin had a bit of an aha moment. And also, even though I was brought up Buddhist, I still have that what's called Abrahamic residue. So It's clear it comes from within our own mind.
That's exactly right. It's not, we call it Abrahamic, whatever you want to call it, but the Buddha would call it, and this seems like we've got to be forced to talk about emptiness now. Buddha calls that the function, one of the consequences of this deep mistake in the mind. So remember, first of all, when we talk about the contents of our mind, and let me just finish first to say this point about why Buddhism says our mind is in its nature pure and clear. See, this is where the big difference, now I think I'll say this one, I find this very fascinating. The Christian teaching, and I had this discussion with my Jesuit priest friend years ago. We were all initially, we did not exist, did we, before? God was there. And then for whatever reason, and I can never get people to explain to me why God decided to make me, but never mind, he has his reasons. I'm not being sarcastic here. So God decided to put a soul into that egg and sperm at the time of conception. Jews apparently say he doesn't put the soul in there till several months later. But the Christians would say the conception, by definition, when mummy's and daddy's egg and sperm come along, that's the condition that God then puts the souls. In that sense, God made me. God gave me this soul, right? This essence of me. So the point of here is, they all say, the Christian teachings would say that, initially we were pure. Then God tested us, the whole Adam and Eve story, whether that's just whatever level you understand that story, but he tested us, and then we became naughty. Now, as I said to this Jesuit priest, we had this discussion, this is the point I'm getting to now, the essence of the Buddhist view about purity of mind. when we say that Buddhism says that our mind is naturally pure, it doesn't mean this view that we were pure once and then we became naughty. No, and there's a logical reason for that. Because the Buddha's view, why Buddha says the nature of our mind is pure, is because delusions, the neuroses, this ego grasping, which we're going to talk about, this belief in a solid, concrete me that causes us to become dualistic and then get attached and get angry and get jealous and all the dramas, all of that's the consequence of this ego grasping. So that stuff can't have started. The point is, the Buddha's view is about cause and effect. Everything that exists is a product of the natural law of cause and effect. So in other words, whatever exists at this moment, at this second, if you posit something as existing, we want to always know, where's the first moment? Where was the first sin? Where was the first mistake? In therapy, we go back into the past, looking for a needle in a haystack. Where was the thing that happened that started to cause me to get angry? We're looking for the first cause. We want a first cause. Buddha says that's a demented idea. It's contradictory. It's not intelligent. If you posit cause and effect, that means whatever exists now, what was the main cause of that? The previous millisecond of that very thing. And what was the cause of that? The previous millisecond of that. And you can track, and we can keep thinking, we keep going back, we're going to find, aha, there's the first one. Don't be ridiculous. If you find a first anything, that means it didn't have a cause, and that is not a possibility. That's why Buddha would assert that consciousness, and indeed matter, the universe, the physical world, is literally beginningless, as nutty as that sounds. So why it sounds nutty to us is because we have a belief in some non-cause thing. We don't think of it this way. We don't articulate it. That's why we have to unpack our minds and all our misconceptions, Buddha says, all these wrong philosophical views. So consciousness, so if anger is in my mind, you will never find the first moment of anger, because every time you say, well, there's the first moment of anger, it can't be, because that moment of anger has to find its source in a previous moment of anger. And where did that moment come from? And you go back 42 trillion years before this universe happened, you're going to find consciousness did exist and is creating, and that's, as mad as that sounds, it's a totally logical idea intellectually. So anger is beginningless. Love and kindness are beginningless. So naturally we think, well, they must be endless. They must never end. No, that's not true. You can have an egg right now. You know that egg comes from a chicken, and you know that chicken came from an egg, and you know that came from a chicken, and you know it came from an egg. But guess what? You could break that egg anytime you like, and you will never get another chicken. And that's Buddha's finding about the delusions in the mind. And that's why hearing this in an ordinary Western way has no meaning for us. That's why we have to study the Buddhist view to give it some kind of intellectual basis, some credibility, not just to believe it as a teaching, that anger, attachment, ego grasping, all the dualistic views, the fears and the dramas, this stuff is not integral to who we are. So what it is about our mind that's naturally pure, mind is beginningless, mind is endless, but delusions are adventitious. Delusions are like bells, we've added them, even though they've always been there, but they are not valid states of mind. And that's why we have to go deeper into our minds. We're learning first intellectually that they're exaggerated, distorted misconceptions, and that and this is the point, because they have no basis in reality, they can be removed. They're lies, in other words. So we know we can remove lies from the mind. I can believe with certainty that 1 + 1 is 3. I could have believed it all my life. It's a concept, right? Then you fix it. You tell me the truth. I go, oh, that's interesting. 1 + 1 is 2. Well, that thought, 1 + 1 is 2, it's a thought. The thought, 1 + 1 is 3, is another thought. One thought is valid because why? It's in sync with reality. We're going to get to this. That's what makes something valid. And 1 + 1 is 3 is not valid. So then you can remove that any time. And what made it go? The conviction about the truth is what annihilated the lie. So that's what becoming a Buddha is. When we get our mind into sync with reality, bring our concepts into sync with reality, then that counteracts the lies in the mind. And the lies in the mind are the delusions. The lies in the mind are the believing in inherent me, believing in inherent you, dualistic ideas, believing I didn't ask to get born, believing my mother made me, believing my mind is the brain, believing there's no cause and effect, believing that I'm right, believing in my own karmic appearances. All these lies that our mind tells us, they are not at the core of our being. So the mind being pure in its nature means goodness and virtue and wisdom. You can never change change them. They are irremovable from the mind. You can never get rid of them because they are at the core of our being. Why? Because they're valid, because they're true. That's the part that's hard. That's what we've got to analyse, go into depth, deeply into the way the mind is and how the delusions function and how the virtues function. And the virtues are, I use the analogy of water. H2O. We know that water is a bit of H, a bit of O. Okay, we have other things in it, minerals, forget them. 2 bits of H and 1 bit of O. That's water. Now, we know that water can be so polluted, you drink it and you die an agonising death. We know that. But we know that the pollution is, and this is the point, is not intrinsic to the H2O. It's not as if it's H2OP97 for pollution. Not that. That's not what water is. So you can extract the pollution. That's the point the Buddha's making. But you cannot extract goodness and wisdom from the mind because that's what the mind is. Speaking simply. That's what it is in its nature. So when you fully develop that and rid the mind of delusions, then you've discovered your true nature. That's who you are. This is how Buddha talks. So that's encouraging. So no matter how polluted the water is, of course, if you didn't know science and you couldn't identify pollution, and you thought it was just the nature of the way water is and might as well accept it and stick some sugar in and hope you don't die, that's a very depressing way to live your life, which is how we think. Oh, you can't remove it. It's just the way it is. No. But don't just believe that. That's why we have to study Buddhist psychology if we choose to understand Buddhism. Then you've got the intellectual basis for the understanding of it. It's very powerful. I'm sure I went off there, but that's it.
So, Venerable, just before your wonderful explanation about this, there were a couple of questions that were exactly about this topic. So I just wanted to confirm. So Francis Lamont asks, could we then say that the mind, like always was, is, and will be?
Yep, that's right.
And Rosemary, so if our Rosemary Lancaster, if our inherent Buddha nature entails compassion and joy and generosity, are these virtues permanent?
Okay, that's what we discussed this last week, Rosemary, or maybe in another teaching. We've got to get an understanding of the word permanent. In our culture, when we say something's permanent, we mean it's unchanging. So, okay, in Buddhism, there's two understandings of there's subtle impermanence, and then there's a grosser level of impermanence. So the grosser level is fairly evident. Things change, trees get, like just now, my, what are these flowers? They're called orchids. They last for ages. I just had to, one is over on the sink because one little petal is left. All the rest are flopped and dead. So, orchids are impermanent. They change. That's one of the key functions of everything that's impermanent in Buddhist view is that it changes. And also, impermanent things are also the product of cause and effect. They're in that sense, they're dynamic. Something comes into being, a whole bunch of conditions come together, and then they disintegrate, and then it changes. That's the way the entire world is, body and mind. So, there's another meaning of, so mind is beginningless and endless, but it's not permanent. In the sense, permanent is a misunderstanding for us. Alex Berzin calls them things that are, never mind. That permanent for us means lasting forever. No. So consciousness is beginningless and endless, but it's in its nature changes moment by moment. So it's dynamic in its nature, changing moment by moment. So you could have something that lasts, you could be a potter and you can make a pot and then 1 minute later it breaks. So that thing lasted for 1 minute, but in its nature, that thing is impermanent. Because it can break. And a thing that's beginningless and endless like the mind, because it changes moment by moment, that's what makes it impermanent. You understand the difference, Rosemary?
Would you say that the mind is a dependent arising?
Well, that's the point. That's bringing us to emptiness. So looks like we have to talk about emptiness, which is where all of these teachings are leading us, It's all beautifully leading us. This is where we get to the true nature of things, which of course is foreign talk for us. We don't just go to school and learn about the true nature of things. We don't learn about the true nature of our mind. It just sounds like religion. We don't want to know, It doesn't sound very physical. But I mean, this is the essence of a Buddhist view. So, okay. But first, before we even say that, I remember one time in one of all these amazing conferences with all the great thinkers of the West, the Dalai Lama, I remember this sort of nice, lovely story. I'll just quote, it's just rough quoting it. He said, Big Bang, no problem. Just not the first Big Bang, that's all. So even for the Buddhist view, and especially this is described in the Vajrayana teachings, the more esoteric teachings, which are really very down to earth. I'm sure we mentioned this. And this is really good to understand when we understand the death process. That the universe consists of matter and minds. That's it, speaking simply. Matter, as we used to talk back in the Middle Ages in our European culture, is made of the 4 elements. This is still the view that they talk in Buddhism. It hasn't been, just because we've come up with a new analysis of different kind of elements, thousands of them in science, doesn't contradict that this is a reality. And that's the view that's used absolutely in Buddhism. That's the view that's the basis of the Tibetan medical system. It's a similar view to the basis of the Chinese system, to the Hindu system. This systems of healing, right? So we are made up of body and we are made up of mind. So, and this is also a very powerful way to understand karma. So, we've got, in the Vajrayana model, and this is again the Tibetan medical system, we've got gross consciousness, which is essentially our sensory consciousness. That's the function of the body, isn't it? The senses. And then we're inextricably linked to our gross consciousness, gross body, we have gross consciousness. Gross body and gross mind. Gross body and gross mind. The mind part is the sensory, and the physical is this bag of bones. And it's clear that at this level, they are inextricably interconnected. I mean, you've got, for example, and this is a very powerful one to understand about the mind too, we discussed this last week, we've got sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. This is already a major point. Sensory consciousness is that part of my mind that functions through the medium of my eyeball, my eye consciousness. Eyeballs don't see from the Buddhist perspective. It's eye consciousness, a part of my mind linked to the eyeball and all the bits and pieces that work nicely. These two together, the physical and the mental working, the physical and the consciousness working together, then that enables me to have a cognition of colour. Colour is the object, like, you know, everybody's Miffy's, it's like she's got blue skin or something. People always talk about, it's like always talking about her race, they always talk about her hair. The first thing we do is talk about Miffy's pink hair, isn't it? Well, maybe you don't, but you can't help but notice Miffy's pink hair, right? So then my eye cognizes pink, okay? That's not my eyeball, but my eyeball's got to be working nicely because they're interdependent. I cannot have a cognition of pink if I don't have a decent eyeball. But the eyeball is not the piece that does the cognizing. That's your mind, fundamental. Ear consciousness.
Yeah, so Venerable, no one would recognise me if I shaved my head off.
I know, that's right. It could be confused and pass you right over in the street. I know that, dear. Exactly. She used to be black and white for a while, black and white on each side. That was a while ago, wasn't it? Anyway, so the point is, your consciousness is not the physical, but it's linked to this body. It's so clear. We know that. But our trouble is, as Lama Yeshe said, we make the body the boss. We think everything is physical. We think, I am this body, this bag of bones, you know. No, it's just your physical. And your mind connected to it. Now, at the subtle level, and this is what happens when you die, there you go, you stop breathing, your heart stopped, you look like you're dead already. You're not dead yet for the Buddha. You're not dead yet. Your subtle consciousness, which the only time we experience that now is in our dreams, isn't it? That's a subtle level of cognition that we don't normally access while we're living around the sensory level. We're so gross at the sensory level, we're not noticing many things. But when a subtle mind, that too is inextricably linked to a subtler level of physicality. Now, this is not the materialist model, clearly, but this is described in great detail in the texts. We've got this subtle physical 72,000 subtle channels, like a subtle nervous system, pervading our entire body, and coursing through those 72,000 subtle channels is this subtle wind energy, or prana. And this is the basis of health in the Tibetan system. They study 12, 13 years this stuff, you know, all the same as the acupuncture one. They call them meridians, a bit different, you know. So this is physical, subtle physical, and then also there's other components in there. But our consciousness, our mental consciousness, all our thoughts and feelings and emotions, which are subtler than the sensory, they are coursing in those 72,000 channels along with those different wind energies, and they're intimately connected. So when you go to your Tibetan doctor and she feels your pulses, she'll feel the imbalance of particular winds which she'll recognize, and she will know that's intimately connected to your attachment. That's why you're having anxiety. Another time, another person, she'll feel your pulses and she'll feel that she knows the winds that are connected to your anger, which is why you're having all these explosive angry fits. They're intimately connected, you know. It's very powerful. And even more powerful with this view in mind, I remember Lama Zopa saying, this really helps understand karma. I'm going off a bit, my tangents, but I will come back. Rinpoche said one time in the Kala Chakra Tantra, so the word Tantra refers to a text and also a type of level of practice. So in the Kala Chakra Tantras, the teachings, he said there are these detailed explanations of the intimate relationship between internal and external energy. Well, internal is mind, consciousness, cognition. External, in this case, is the wind energies coursing through these 72,000 subtle channels. So when Lama Zopa said, and this is why mind is so crucial, you can't get away with anything, every second counts. So he said, even when your mind is, let's say, angry for a moment, that anger connected to those winds, it pollutes those winds. And that eventually karmically manifests as sickness. Even in this life, we see this. And that in turn, karmically, over a longer period, manifests as sickness in a future life, and then even more long-term impacts upon the external elements of the world, and then you get born in a country where the imbalance of all the elements. This is directly the result. So being born like us right now, COVID-19, it's a physical environment. People are sick and dying, and you touch a person, like I said last week, like the cane toads. You touch a cane toad, you eat a cane toad like the animals do. In Queensland, they have these cane toads they brought in to stop another creature when they had all the sugar industry, wasn't it, in Queensland? You non-American Australians won't know that. So this cane toad is so disgusting. Animals die an agonizing death when they eat it. Well, we humans now are like cane toads for each other. That's environmental karma over countless thousands of lifetimes of our own anger and harming, which leaves imprints in our mind, which pollutes the wind energies, which in turn causes sickness, which in turn causes suffering rebirths, which in turn even impacts upon the external elements, causing the imbalance and the earthquakes and all the business and all the suffering of the physical world. We make up the entire universe, all coming from the mind. But there's this relationship between body and mind. You can't separate them. But they're not the same thing. They're not the same. They're interdependent. They function in relation to each other, but they are not the same thing. This is fundamental to understand. And it's liberating because even though you have some sickness, physical, by purifying your mind, you can heal your illness if you're really kind of a good practitioner, There's no question about that. So I did go off the tangent, and now I forget the point. Was that enough?
There is a related question about this that, often in a time of uncertainty and lots of worry, that it leads to a lot of anger. So
That's right.
In Australia, 80% of our checkout chicks are abused every day.
Oh, really? In the supermarkets?
Continuously abused.
Well, okay. Now we're going back to why are the causes of why do we get upset when things change? Why, when things are uncertain, are we upset? But before that, what was that point before that was the question that I went off into a tangent on? I want to see if I completed the answer.
Beginningless mind and those good qualities, are they inherent or permanent?
Okay, yeah, thank you. Well, and we're going to, that's right. And we're going to, so we're going to go into that more. So I'll now answer this point. This is now back to the way the mind works conventionally, back to the model of the mind that we learn in high school, in this nice model of the Langri, junior school, high school, and university, the lower scope, middle scope, and great scope teachings. So in the middle scope, in high school, we learn in depth about the way the mind functions. We learn Buddhist psychology, the epistemological model of the mind, all this, like we're discussing just before. So like we've been saying, the three categories of states of mind, there's no fourth, are those that are neurotic, I-based, ego-grasping based, fear-based, that's their nature. That's an important point. They're fear-based, anger, attachment, jealousy, low self-esteem. Buddha talks about 84,000 of these, and they all subsume to these three called ego-grasping, attachment, and anger or aversion. These three sound so cute. These three toxic emotions. These run our lives right now. Everybody in the universe, mice and dogs and ants and humans, not just humans. Buddhist psychology refers to all living beings. So, this analysis, there are many mistakes in our mind. Buddha says mistakes. And don't think that's being fundamentalist, like you've got to believe what Buddha's saying. No, he doesn't want you to believe a single word. He says, this is my findings, this is the methodology, this is the proof of it, you go find it for yourself. Then if he's wrong, you point it out to him. As the Dalai Lama said, if you find the Buddha's wrong, you must reject him. Of course you must. So, these lies in our mind, this is what's hard to see because they're so ingrained in our mind. Our minds are imbued with these views coming from countless lives of believing in them. And they're misconceptions, they're delusions. Literally, we are delusional. It's a brilliant word in English. Delusional means you're not in touch with reality. This is absolutely bullseye for what Buddha's saying. And this is the cause of our suffering. So, the root problem, the root one, the ego grasping, the ignorance, the maripa, unawareness that clings to the self-existent me. We'll get to that. This gives rise to the two main ones in our daily life. Attachment and aversion. Along with that, and this is what's overtly happening now, with these, we have another view in our mind, a misconception that doesn't believe in change. Things shouldn't change. Things don't change. So when things are good, we all know we can't stand the thought that things will change. So why is that? Why is that? Because attachment is this junkie in us that can only bear the nice things. It only wants the nice things. It's this intense entitlement that is rooted in ego grasping that assumes I deserve only the good things. So what do you think is going to happen when the bad things happen? We're going to have a panic attack. Of course we are. And that's called aversion. That's what happens. It's just natural. When attachment is thwarted, when the things that attachment don't want happen, then that is what aversion is. But there's going to be a whole spectrum of responses. Some people are very quiet and don't get angry and shout and yell. They'll just turn it against themselves and become depressed and self-loathing. But that's still thwarted attachment. And the ones who abuse everybody in the shops, they're the ones who got externalized aversion because their attachment's not getting what they want. So that just could mean because the person in front of you is taking too long to check out their dinner. It could be that you dropped the cup when you're washing the dishes, you get angry. It's because the kid talked too loud. Your husband didn't do what you wanted immediately. That's how fragile we are, because attachment's on the alert every second and is desperate to get good things. But the tragedy, as we look into this more deeply, and it takes time, I tell you, we're going to see that attachment, this bottomless pit, this junkie in us that is frantic to get only the nice things. But when it gets the nice thing, this is the trouble, it thinks it's found happiness, but then it changes, and that we get even more distress and more panic stress. So grasping at things as permanent and desperately wanting only the nice things are totally linked together. So of course you're going to get angry when attachment doesn't get what it wants. Why do you think we're all so neurotic? All depressed and anxious and on pills, going crazy, killing yourself or each other? Why? It is not simplistic to say it. But we think what happened when you're 2 or 7 or whatever, and we think it's so complicated. It is not complicated. It's because you've got attachment and aversion. It's profound analysis. But if we don't learn it properly, you just think it's a load of rubbish, you know. Of course you're going to get angry when you don't get what you want. This is the nature of it. That's what it is. That's what anger is. Anger is thwarted attachment. Attachment, that means you have to understand attachment. And it's not just like, oh, I like chocolate cakes. It's not like that. That's so gross. It's primordially deep. In fact, there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum of attachment, of its manifestation. The deepest level, the most primordial level, is what's called dissatisfaction. This is incredible. So why are we born with this? We're born with a level of just primordial feeling of not having enough, not being enough. No matter what I get, not enough. How much mummy loves me, not enough. How much I get, not enough. How much food, no matter what it is, it's never enough. It's the default assumption of this attachment in the bones of our being from having practiced it in countless lives that we get born with dissatisfaction. That's what we mean by self-hate. That's what we mean by I'm never enough, I'm not good enough. Don't blame your Catholic mummy. Don't blame your Jewish mummy. It's just your own view from practicing these ridiculous misconceptions for countless lives. We're programmed with them. So that's the manifestation of attachment. Dissatisfaction. Then, of course, because you're dissatisfied, you go the grosser aspect of attachment now manifests. Well, you think what's missing? Because what's missing, so you're going to look for it. Where are you going to look? The objects of the 5 senses. It's pretty evident. The cakes, the bodies, the handbags, the weather, whatever it might be, frantically trying to find that. Why? Because attachment believes when I get that, then the dissatisfaction will go away. So we try the cake. Oh, this is going to happen this time, I'll get it. No. What happens? Before you know it, you want to vomit. What happened to the happiness? Down the toilet. You missed it. So we'll try again tomorrow. And we keep going for countless lives, Buddha says, bashing our heads against bricks walls, trying to get fulfilled by chocolate cakes and bodies and happy weather and nice politics. It's not going to work. Wrong analysis. Mistaken analysis. Buddha's not being fundamentalist. He says it's a mistaken conceptual analysis of the world, and it's programmed in our minds. That's why it's hard. You know. And that's why telling my stories about my friends in prison who don't have the luxury of changing their external environment. They're living in these garbage dumps. Many of them on death row, many there for 40 years, lost in this system. You got no choice. You work on your mind or you go mad. And they know they don't have the luxury to change that. They haven't got a key. This is why there's such powerful examples, you know. That's the answer to that, Miffy.
So Marius, who also asked that question, then kind of continues on that our cultural approach is kind of like that if we are kind of happy in this time because we finally got a bit of a break and got some time to ourselves, that people kind of have this, how dare you be happy in such a difficult time.
I know, and this is where we have to, I know, so it's a really good point, isn't it? Many people now getting rich. I mean, Mr. Amazon, I think, makes $50 million a second or 50,000. I mean, some people are getting rich The rich are getting richer because they're finding opportunities, to buy. I mean, now in America, you just wait, Australia probably too, all the homelessness is going to happen. People can't pay their rent. They're going to chuck out and they're going to be homeless. So all these cheap houses, guess who buys the bloody cheap houses? The rich people. And this is how we all know how it is, So, what did you say? I forgot.
Just about if you're happy in a difficult time.
Okay,
like,
yes. This is where you have to understand karma. We have to understand karma here, because this condition, I mean, I'll use myself as an example. I'm not trying to be arrogant, but normally I'm tropping around the world with my little bag, and I go here and I go there. People are also wonderful and kind. I live with Miffy when I'm there, next door room. Come in at midnight and watch telly with her while she's lying in bed with Eddie. How's Eddie anyway?
He's good. He's relishing Corona retreat.
There you go. That's right. Exactly. Well, I know for myself, here I am in this little house in Santa Fe in New Mexico. Friend Charmaine, who runs the centre here, lives with a boyfriend around the corner, so she offered me her house. So, I mean, it's got air conditioning. It's very hot out there, but it's got air conditioning. It's beautifully built, got lovely air conditioning. I said, what about winter? Oh, there's floor heating, she said, in the winter. So, I mean, I'm having a wonderful, happy time. I'm sitting here doing my editing and doing my jobs, and I walk 3 feet from my kitchen to this seat here, to my little Zoom room where Buddha is, instead of climbing on an aeroplane. So I can tell you, I'm definitely more content. I'm very content. I'm relaxed, easygoing. I've got jobs. I get food. I mean, you could say I'm better off. Not better off, really, but you could say that. But so then, why is that? And why are so many people suffering? We know that. Because this is where we have to have an understanding of karma, why things happen. We didn't talk much about karma last week, and I think that's a good place to go. I mean,
there's a lady, Marg, who's asking, so, if we eschew dissatisfaction, how do we then change society or advance social justice?
That's a very interesting point, because when we we conflate satisfaction with laziness and kind of like self-centeredness. No, it's a good question. No. That's just greed. That's like, when attachment gets what it wants, you've got money in the bank and you've got lots of attachment. Attachment drives that scenario. Oh, aren't I lucky, we'll say. You couldn't give a damn in hell about the people next door because you're completely like a junkie. Attachment, the only way to describe attachment is a junkie mind. It's constantly hungry, and the more you get, the more you want. The more hungry you get, the more you have the junk, the more suffering. That's not, so satisfaction may be that moment when you have you inject the heroin in, that moment when you eat the delicious cake, but we know it doesn't last. But the general contentment of having a nice house and a nice place, and the hubris of attachment then, oh, aren't I lucky? And you sit back. That's not satisfaction. Satisfaction is when you've given up attachment. Satisfaction is having a joyful, happy, fulfilled mind that naturally is open to compassion and empathy. There's a major difference, and that's where you've got to understand the difference in Buddhist psychology between the neurotic, deluded, fear-based, I-based states of mind and the virtuous, valid, empathetic states of mind. There's a huge, massive difference. So if you've got satisfaction, it means you've given up attachment and you're a blissfully joyful person. You'd have you'd have self-respect, you'd be very dignified, you'd be fulfilled, you wouldn't be greedy, you wouldn't get attached, you wouldn't get angry, you wouldn't get depressed, you wouldn't get jealous, and you'd naturally have empathy and love for others, automatically. So it's a very different meaning of satisfaction, isn't it?
That's mind-blowing.
Yes. Very different. And we won't know that, and because of the words we all use, the same English words. Buddha doesn't use fancy words. Like in modern psychology, we've got volumes of bizarre new names for new mental illnesses. Buddha hasn't changed in 2,500 years. He calls them attachment, anger, jealousy. They seem so simple. But when we understand his analysis of these, that's the profound piece, So, okay, we can go towards karma. I want to talk about karma. What, Miffy?
There is also one question from Susanna Irvine about once reaching enlightenment, is that finally a permanent state, or is it a dependent arising and will ultimately also change?
Well, Susanna, like we said, no, there's different, two mistakes in that question. Ultimately change, that's not the issue. We assume changing, at the moment, the change that we experience is when you're hungry and it changes into satisfaction when you get a cake. Will that change? Yes, it will. It'll turn back into suffering because the assumptions underneath it are mistaken. But the concept of impermanence is not a moralistic thing. It's simply the nature of physical matter and the nature of a consciousness that it changes from moment to moment. So a gross change would be changing from attachment to anger. That's a gross change, but that's not the issue here. The fundamental nature of mind and the fundamental nature of matter is that because they're the product of the law of cause and effect, they're coming together and produced by various conditions coming together. They're highly dynamic, so they fall apart. That natural kind of change. It's not good or bad. It's a natural kind of change, a dynamic, changing from moment to moment. So, like I said before, Susanna, the meaning of permanent here is not the same. Don't even use the word permanent here. So when your mind, when it's a fully developed mind, will no longer change from happiness to suffering. That's the point. Your mind, once you've removed the causes of suffering, which are delusions and the karmic imprints, once you remove those utterly from your mind, and you can because they're adventitious, because they're not integral to who you are, once they're removed from the mind utterly, they can never come back. They can never come back. That's the difference between the Christian view, that you were pure once and then you got dirty. Not a possibility. If you're enlightened now, there's no way in the universe you could ever change and become samsaric again, because you've cut the root of suffering. Once you've cut the root of something, once you've broken that egg, you'll never get another chicken. So consciousness in its nature is beginningless and endless. Consciousness in its nature is the product of cause and effect. Enlightened consciousness in its nature is now free of the causes of suffering, karmic imprints and delusions. And once they're gone, and the beginning of that is when you realize emptiness, once they're gone utterly, they can't return. It's not possible. There's no cause of them. There's no cause. So in that sense, when you're a Buddha mind, your mind goes on for eternity, but it never changes back into suffering. That's the change it will never experience. But it changes moment by moment because it's a dynamic thing. That's again. Okay. What else?
So far, that's the end of the questions.
Good, excellent. Okay.
Oh, hang on.
Okay, what?
Okay, so it must be a real skill to not coming across as apathetic when people perceive you going through a difficult time. So we can inadvertently disturb people around us or cause great concern if we say, yes, we've never been happier, and we actually mean it quite sincerely. So, we don't want to appease people.
But we don't. But I agree. But we don't have to spout out how we feel. That's what we do in our culture. We have to tell people how we feel all the time. Well, just shut up and mind your own business. And if you really are content, that means you're also compassionate. So if you're with other people who are suffering, oh, I'm so happy. I'm so sorry you're not happy. That's just plain arrogance. You might, happiness is something you have to talk about. Happiness is a state of mind that's free of upset and down, up and down like yo-yo, and anxiety and anger and jealousy. That's what happy means. And even this is a massive difference. We have to understand the difference. This is why the junkie analogy is a really good one. Buddha's basically saying having attachment is a junkie mind, is craving. It's always wanting something more. It's never satisfied by its nature. It can't be. Heroin or cake can't make you happy. We all know that. So the satisfaction, the happiness that comes from eating a piece of cake is a happy feeling. But look at what induced it. It's like the happiness of having you just got your fix of heroin. It's the same. Think I'm being silly. It's the same analogy. The hunger is there, the dissatisfaction. Oh, what'll make me feel better? Oh, I'll have a cake. What'll make me feel better? I'll have a glass of wine. What'll make me feel better? I'll get a new boyfriend or a new handbag or whatever it might be. So the happiness that does come is still happiness. It's still a feeling of well-being. It's true, it is. It does occur, but it won't last. And it's because it's driven, it's impelled by the heroin or the cake or the handbag or the boyfriend, then it's not stable happiness. It's like sort of like hysterical happiness over the top. And then eventually it will die out and stop and you'll get hungry again. That's not the happiness that Buddha's talking about. This is a profound point. So, what the hell is Buddha talking about? What is the happiness that he talks about? It's really simple. We think happy feelings are what we get when attachment gets what it wants. That's what we mean by happiness right now. We don't know any other, think about it, we don't know any other method for getting happy feelings other than getting an object of attachment, other than getting something. In general, okay? Now, look at the other happiness. And we understand this in our culture. The other happiness is the one the Buddha's talking about, and he doesn't own this. He's not a creator. You can still be a good communist and have this, or a good Muslim. It doesn't as if Buddha doesn't own it, he's got no copyright on it, but it's his analysis of it that's pretty profound. This other happiness is a sense of well-being that comes because your mind doesn't have much attachment. It's profoundly different. It's like the happiness of a junkie and the happiness of a person who's loving and kind. When a person is loving and kind and generous, has got self-respect, has got self-confidence, that person is naturally joyful. And joy is another word for happiness. We are so thinking of happiness as being the result of getting something. And that's just unstable. It's better than nothing, but it doesn't last, and that's proof. Buddha's not being mean to us. It's proof. Look at the simple one of the chocolate cake. The more you have craving for chocolate cake, the more you believe that when you get chocolate cake, then you'll get happy. You know guaranteed it will trigger a happy feeling. It is for sure. You do the analysis, and you first put it in the mouth, it's the best happy feeling. And actually, it's downhill from there, but we can't bear to see that. So we think, we're not satisfied. We want another moment of happiness, don't we? So we have to have a second piece of cake. Why aren't you happy right there? What's wrong? Why isn't that happiness enough? You've got to ask that question. Why is not that moment of happiness enough? We've got to ask that question, but we never do. As a child, well, even now, my main attachment is food, I mean, I'm a nun. I don't have to worry about clothes or a $10 budget. I don't have to worry about hair. I have a few, shoes. I like my shoes because like the Muslim ladies, you only have nice feet, you can't see the rest under the black dresses. So I'm like that a bit. But food's the one. Since I was a kid, food is the one, always food. I got completely overexcited by food. Food, now I couldn't care less about a boy. They can't fool me. But food gets me every time. Still. I understand. And you know it now. You joke about it. But food, and what attachment does, you see, is exaggerate the deliciousness of the object. So you believe all automatic, when I get the cake, I'll get happy. It'll trigger a nice feeling. But what we forget is, isn't it, that I keep eating that. First of all, again, like I said, you have the first mouthful. When your stomach's empty, the cake's delicious, and you have your first mouthful. It is incredible pleasure that is triggered. That's a fact. Buddha's not arguing with that pleasure. It is definitely called, so the word pleasure, happiness, joy, good feeling, they're all synonymous. They're just levels, that's all. So definitely the cake is a catalyst for triggering in my mind and my sensory consciousness a happy feeling. Fact. But look, I don't know how to get that feeling without the cake, do I? I can't just sit there and go, I'm going to get really happy now. No, it doesn't work because we've got attachment. So that's the problem. It stymies everything. And then the other aspect of it is, like I said, that happy feeling of the first piece of cake is definitely the best happiness. But immediately you have to ask the question, why am I not satisfied with that moment of happiness? You've got to ask that question. Why am I not content with it? Why not just sit there and go, that was blissful, and then keep it going? No, got to put the cake in the mouth again. Because we don't know how to sustain a happy feeling. We don't know because we are junkies. We are junkies. So I have to have another mouthful. And you're hoping it'll be as delicious as the first, but already you know it's downhill from there. You have a third mouthful, then a second piece. And why? Because you keep waiting for that satisfaction to come. But it can't come. It won't come. What will come instead? Before you know it, you're onto the third piece, and you look at the cake now, and it looks repulsive. We know that. And what happened to the happy feelings? What happened to the satisfaction? It's gone like the wind. Suddenly, what have you got? Unhappiness, more distress. In other words, as my mother used to say as a child, and I would think and think and think about it. Bobsy, she'd say, that's me, the more you get, the more you want. It's exactly agreeing with the Buddha. That's the happiness we have now. So conclusion, the happiness we have now, which is the junkie happiness, the pleasure that is triggered with contact with sensory objects. And that's just the first level. That is some happiness, but it is polluted, it's driven by the grossness of the sensory object. As Lama Yeshe says, when we've really got a lot of attachment, it's like really dull. Your mind is, when you're really greedy and you have your delicious Vegemite toast, we Australians love our Vegemite toast, you go, oh, what happened to the toast? You look at the plate, it's empty. You don't even remember eating it because attachment is so gross. You just shove it in like an animal, with respect to animals. So what happens is, it does trigger pleasure, but the point is we don't know how to get that pleasure without getting the cake or the object or the praise or the boyfriend or the nice health or the good thing or the lovely politics or you name it. So no wonder we're distressed, living on the edge of distress every second. So what is the happiness that Buddha's talking about? But everybody understands this one. Don't think Buddha owns it. It's not religious. When a mind is less attached, less angry, less neurotic, guess what it is? It's more satisfied. So satisfaction is a polite word for happiness. So look at some people who get happy by helping others. Don't think they're Pollyanna. That's a real kind of happiness. Okay, if you're attached to people's opinions about you, it won't last. But happiness for Buddha, okay, conclusion. We think happiness is what we get, a happy feeling is what we get when attachment gets what it wants. No, Buddha says, no, please, no, no. Happiness is what you end up with when you give up attachment. That's stable happiness. That's a mind that's naturally joyful. And that's proving Buddha's point that the mind is naturally pure and in its nature, naturally blissful. So when you, in Lama Yeshe's book on Mahamudra, he's got a chapter on some of the amazing, outrageous benefits of having accomplished single-pointed concentration. This genius technique made up by these Indians 3,000 years ago that Buddha took with him very happily when he diverged in his own direction 2,500 years ago. That's still being practiced right now, called calm abiding, called Shamata. So what's that? That's when you've completely harnessed the grosser level of your mind, the conceptuality and the sensory, but through this amazing technique, and you've gone to this subtler level of your own mind, the subtler level of your own cognition, where you really taste the true, that's where you taste the true nature of your mind. Why? Because temporarily the delusions have ceased, and the gross conceptuality has ceased. So you've accessed this subtle level of consciousness, which is naturally joyful. Naturally joyful. You don't need cake to get joyful, is what Buddha's saying. That's his entire point. In other words, he's got a method. Like I said, we think happiness comes, pleasant feeling. The word pleasant feeling, happiness, joy, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, you name it, whatever level it is of happy feelings. We think they are what you get when you get the object, get a sensory object in general. And that's the only method we have. But the Buddha says, I've got a better method, and it's cheaper, it's free. By going to a subtle level of your mind where temporarily attachment and the delusions have ceased, where temporarily your sensory consciousness has ceased, you've accessed this, you've awoken this subtle level of your own mind, that because it's not linked to the delusions and it's not linked to the physical, it is naturally joyful. Naturally clear. That's the proof. You haven't realized emptiness yet. You're still in samsara. But this is the point. And when and everybody you talk to, even people who have a little moment of nice meditation, the thing people all say is that joy, Lama calls it ecstasy, he calls it rapture. Hear these words, people. Now, if you hear those words in relation to sensory objects, you're hearing about violent sexual experiences, right? And the mind goes completely berserk. I mean, when the body's involved, because the body's so gross, when the body is involved in our sensory experience, in our happy experiences, it's naturally very agitated and very gross. But this is, and Lama Yeshe says this, but as your mind gets more subtle, your experience of joy is purely mental, and it's also not agitated, but it's completely peaceful. So have a mind that's peaceful and full of rapture sounds like a contradiction to us, But this is the Buddha's point about that's the nature of our mind. That's who we really are, and that's just conventional nature. You haven't realized emptiness yet. So it's really technical, and it's very empowering to hear this, that this is what our true nature. But to try and experience that happiness without getting the cake or getting what you want is not easy. That's why we get so distressed, especially if you get things easily, like nice food. I mean, you suddenly put me in a house now in Santa Fe where it's, 40 degrees in the outside, which it is, and it's got no nice ceiling, it's got no AC, and it's all hot and steamy with noise outside full of rats. Guess what, honey? I won't be happy, I promise you. And that's the test. About most of us, if we are happy now, it's because we've got good fortune from our past virtue. This is due to my merit, but I'm resting on my laurels, I should be choosing to live in some garbage dump instead of thinking, oh, I'm so happy. It's easy to be happy when you get what you want. That's not happiness. That's called self-centeredness. That's complacency, and that brings arrogance and hubris. Whereas if you have happiness when things are going bad, hey, baby, that's the test. That's the real test. And that's when we begin to practice. We begin to practice when attachment stops getting what it wants. That's the real part. So when you can learn to be happy by having a simple experience, by having difficulties, and by being kind and loving to other people, that is real happiness. Not until you realize emptiness will you keep that permanent. But when you realize emptiness, then you can't be unhappy again. But even relatively. So there's a big difference in the word happiness, and it's a question of where it's coming from. This is the analysis in Buddhist psychology. It's pretty profound, I tell you.
So Venerable Onyx Yeshe Yangchen kind of has said something about this, that in her 20s she tried to tick all the boxes kind of and get all of those things, but now she is actually much happier to be able to serve others, being a middle-aged spinster.
There you go, that's right.
I mean, it's just a shame that, we have to wait till we're kind of a bit tired and stop chasing them.
But I know it's true. It is true, and relatively speaking, we can say that if we're trying to be a bit renounced and be easygoing and relaxed, if we just got one piece of clothing and not too worried. But still, how deep attachment is. I mean, I know my mind. Like I said, if I didn't have AC, I'm really not being sarcastic now, but there's another level. I'm content with my $10, with my one pair of robes. It's what I wear every day and I never get bored. I'm content with my one pair of shoes. I'm content with not many possessions. I sound so renounced to people. It's just some past karma. I mean, it's fine. It suits me perfectly. But if you start, I mean, the more basic level is when your comfort zone has been attacked, when you've got pains in your knee all the time, forget about other pains. When you don't get the nice food, when you get sick easily, or when the house is too hot, or it's too cold in the winter, then is the real test of when you can be happy. I can say, I know that with certainty. I can be happy without many clothes. People think I'm renounced. I'm not, it's just a habit. I don't care. It's easier. I'm happy to have a bald head, That's not being renounced. It is relatively. I don't need 6 boyfriends and 42 houses, like that. But when the real test is when you're going to be happy when things go wrong. And that's why that level of teachings that's taught in the Mahayana path, where they talk about transforming problems into happiness, that's the real start of real happiness. When we can be happy when things go bad. And that's why now is a powerful experience. And it's not easy. My God, it's not easy. But that's when real practice starts. When real practice starts when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And that keeps going.
Venerable, there's an associated question with this from Lisbeth Elvery about, say, for instance, being in a difficult relationship or an abusive relationship. Yes. So where do you kind of draw the line with attachment?
I know, John, it's a really good point. How are we going for time? We're okay?
Yeah, we're okay.
Okay, good. Okay.
And Marius has kind of also said we're almost like in an abusive relationship with reality.
There you go, that's right. Very good point. I've got a feeling I want 5-minute break and I'll come back. We'll do that one. All right?
Sure. Okay.
A quick break, and then we'll shift gear and go to this other one about relationships. It's a pretty powerful point. Okay.
Okay, so 5-minute break, and then we've got a half an hour.
Yes.
Yep, we're all back too.
Good, let's go. Okay, let's continue then. Yeah, this is another whole dynamic. The whole thing, right now we're talking mainly about our own mind right there. But now let's look at our mind when we're in relationship with others. And that's, of course, we have relationships with cakes and things, but it's with human beings we tend to have the problems, isn't it, Okay. This is a minefield. And this is why it's so important to understand the way the Buddhist teachings are presented in this orderly way. The so-called wisdom wing and the so-called compassion wing. The wisdom wing is all the nuts and bolts of Buddhist understanding karma and understanding your mind and Buddhist psychology, and you apply that in order to control your body, your speech, and your mind. Why? Because you are sick of suffering, you're sick of being out of control, you want to harness your own crazy energy because you want to begin to get in touch with who you are and want to start to subdue your attachment and your anger and your jealousy because you realize that causes you suffering. That's the first level of practice. Now, if you have a relationship and you're at that level, you'll have a good relationship. You'll manage. But our trouble is, let's just imagine we're all the typical victim mode, which is a typical person who doesn't know what goes on in their mind, who believes totally that the boyfriend is the one who's meant to make me happy, who thinks I'm a creep anyway, and then, relies upon the food or the boyfriend or the weather or the job, whatever, to define ourselves. That's how we normally are. That's normal human life. Join the club here. So we're at that level, and depending on how much attachment I've got, how much neediness I've got, because attachment is just emotional neediness. The assumption of attachment is that I am not enough on my own, whether it's on your own without the cake or on your own without the person. Clearly in our culture, this thing of having a relationship. I've just been watching on Netflix recently the Indian matchmaker one. Have you been watching? Do you watch Netflix, Mithy? You don't? I'm watching it. As an Indian matchmaker one. It's outrageous. The whole business of organising. Of course, as one person in the New York Times said, it's all to do with the rich upper class in India, the mega rich poor Indian, the mega rich Indians. And I mean, the number of rich in India is much more extreme even than in America in comparison with the poor. It's outrageous. Anyway, it's very fascinating. This reliance upon a person, in your life, So we can see that all our cultures, and even the cultures of animals, are based on this one of having a partner, isn't it? It's very powerful. And this really gets us actually to the deepest attachment that we all have. It isn't really attachment to sex and houses that are why we have relationships. It's this fundamental primordial assumption of attachment, which is coming from the primordial assumption of a neurotic I, because attachment's the main voice of this belief in the neurotic I. The voice of attachment here is that I'm not enough on my own. I have to have another person. So look at our culture over centuries, and animals as well. We've created this culture, as karma, that is rooted in having two people. I mean, it used to be old-fashioned, man and woman having babies, now it's more complicated, isn't it? But the assumption in this attachment is that on my own, I'm just not enough. So what does that mean? What are you attached to? It's not even the sex. It's not even the comfort. It's the attachment to being seen and heard by somebody else, which is the validation we desperately need. Validation here is simply attachment. Not having attachment, you're isolated, you feel lonely, you feel I'm nobody. Why have you think you're nobody? Because there's no one telling you you're a nice person. That's what we have an attachment relationship for. We're imagining that person is going to validate me every second. When they look at me, they're going, wow, Robina, you're a lovely person. And then I feel I'm allowed to now think I'm a lovely person because someone says so. I mean, that's schizophrenic, but that's how deep our attachment is. That's what drives our craving for relationships, Okay, so the minefield is, if you come into a relationship based upon the normal samsaric view of I'm not enough on my own and I've got to be approved of by somebody else, then you're asking for trouble, which is what happens. We get trouble, don't we? Because attachment's driving it. And because this attachment is so primordial, and also because it's mixed with our goodness, we've also got love and compassion. So that's good stuff, but we conflate them. We can't see the difference between love and attachment, for example. And this is why it's crucial, if we want to study Buddhism, want to understand it more deeply and use it in our lives, we have to distinguish, first intellectually and then experientially, between attachment for somebody and love for somebody. This is fundamental. So again, what's attachment? If I've got, let's say there's John. I've got a fellow there. John, you're my boyfriend, okay? John K, you're my boyfriend. So let's just say John. And you're all the time you're wanting this partner, you're looking for somebody, you're looking at every man, if it's men you like, in terms of whether or not they satisfy my needs, isn't it? That's what I'm thinking. So I go around and eventually I'll land on John. And first of all, there's due to karmic connection. We've got a karmic connection. And for him to be even nice to me for a minute and me to be nice to him, that implies we have a good karmic connection from past virtue. So that's good. That's fantastic. You bump into him. But attachment is running the show. It overrides everything. It's already assessing John within one meeting, no doubt, that he's the guy, he's the one. And then I have all these projections onto him. My attachment, attachment's key function is it exaggerates the deliciousness of the object. So my attachment, with all these other ones, I need somebody, I must have somebody. On my own, I'm nobody, I'm lonely, I need someone to talk to, someone to approve me, someone to love me. So then I get John. So then I visualize the rest of my life. I see it all in front of me, isn't it? We're going to be together till we're 80, have a nice house, 2.5 children, whatever it might be, the story. And then I'm totally and utterly and completely 100% believing that when I get that, then I'll get happy. That's how we talk. That's what we believe. So the typical victim mode, even being a nice person, to have a lot of attachment doesn't mean you're a monster. It's just you're a normal person. Join the universe here, folks, It's what drives all of us. So then you get John, and then first of all, from the distance, he looks divine, and he dresses up nicely, and I dress up nicely when we meet, so we always look our best. But then you decide you're going to get married or live together, and suddenly you relax, so you think it doesn't matter now because he's going to love me for who I am. So you fart in bed, and you don't brush your hair, and so no wonder. And then you wonder why the poor man gets a bit upset. Because we're all so dependent on lovely things. So we take it all for granted. And then because we're living in close all the time, I start to find fault. Because my attachment won't get happy when he farts. I won't get happy when he leaves the toilet seat up. I won't get happy if he doesn't look at me with the same dazzled eyes 24 hours a day, like I imagined he would. So what am I going to do? My attachment's starting to not get what it wants. I'm starting to get upset, and depending on how strong my attachment is, and then depending on how, how much anger I have, or how much hurt I get, or how much jealous, or how much depressed, depending on my personality, then you're going to start getting more dissatisfied, more miserable. And then who do I blame? Of course I blame John. Why? Because he disappointed me. Disappointment is the classic example of, a polite word for aversion. You get disappointed because your attachment didn't get what it wanted. But of course, I'm not conscious. I have no awareness of all this going on in my mind. I just think suddenly he's not so delicious after all. And what happened? And I moan about him and I complain. And I talk to my mother. I talk to my sister. Then I maybe go to a therapist. And I'm upset because John this and John that. So she tries to get me, my therapist, to see my mind. But I can't see my mind because what do you mean my mind? As Lama Zopa says, the vast majority of all humans on this planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in our mind plays any role at all in our lives. That's the function of these nightmarish delusions. It's all John's fault. When he was making me happy a year before, that's all John's fault. Why are you happy, Robina? Oh, it's John. Why are you sad, Robina? Oh, it's John. So you blame John for your happiness and you blame John for your suffering. That's what we do. Join the universe. It's called samsaric. And there's no awareness of my mind whatsoever. It's all about John. The object. It's the object. It's the object. All the time. That's normal. So what happens? You either kill me, I kill myself, I kill him, or you live in misery for the next 64 years. And then, anyway, this is the nightmare. I'm exaggerating. Of course I am. But get my point. So, let's say, and this could be the same for your boss. What's the difference? Your job. Suddenly you think it's the best job in the world, then you don't like your boss, you don't like your colleagues, you start moaning, you come home, you complain the whole time. So, okay, so whether it's John or your boss, and someone says, well, Robina, maybe you should leave John. I mean, that's shocking in our culture, and that's part of the problem. We just assume relationships are meant to last for eternity, and that, not being rude, but that's the Christian teaching, because marriage is so holy, you've got to last forever. So we have this assumption that you're a failure if I leave John. But also out of complacency. Oh, no, I couldn't do that. Oh, no, he really does love me. Or he will change one day. Then, okay, Robina, you're not going to leave John. Then what are you going to do about your mind? Are you going to learn to be less jealous and less angry and less depressed? No, it's not my fault. That's John's fault. So we not only not know that I can leave John if I can't handle it, we don't even know I can change my attitude towards John. So that's what insanity is. And that's how we live our lives. I mean, we might as well be in prison. We not only don't know we could leave John, there's no lock on the door, but you might as well be in prison. At least my friends in prison know they can't escape from prison, but they know they can change their minds. And I've got so many friends in these garbage dumps who really become happy human beings because they've changed their approach to prison. They've changed their interpretation of prison. That means they've learned to give up attachment and anger, and they become happy human beings living in these dumps. Whereas with John, I not only can't just think I could leave him, but I can't even know I can change my mind. That's the living hell of most of our lives. So Buddha says, okay, if you can handle him, if you can't handle him, then leave him. This is too shocking for us, because we find 47 reasons why you can't. Oh, no, I shouldn't do that. Oh, no, I'm not supposed to do that. Oh, no, he really does love me. Oh, no, maybe I wouldn't get a job. Oh, I couldn't do that. We just have this no confidence whatsoever, but you keep blaming John. So you've got to decide. There's two options in the end, no matter what it is. There are two options precisely for all of us. This is so brutal. We could either change the job, leave the boss, leave John, or change your mind. That's it. And this is what's stupendously hard. So let's just say, I make the decision, and it's got to be a real decision you make. I'm unhappy, the relationship's not going the way I want, so I've got to decide, what am I going to do? Will I leave John or not? That's your first question to yourself. That's the first decision to make. You've got to be proactive in it. So if you decide that you will stay, that's powerful. But not just to be complacent and continue to moan and complain. No. If you decide to stay, that means you have to consider there must be something worthwhile there. It's worth the effort. There's something in it for you, not to mention being compassionate to him. So then you really can begin to practice. That's a profound level. But you don't have to stay. If you can't handle it, you don't stay. It is demented. I always joke, it's not a joke, they always talk about how 40% of all women on this planet who get murdered are murdered by the bloke in the same bed. This is not against men. This is against hopelessness and despair and victim mentality. We don't think we've got the power to change our mind, and we don't think we've got the power to change the relationship. People who sit in abusive relationships for 40 years. That's insanity. That shows the depth of our misery. It shows the depth of our hopelessness. It shows the depth of our attachment and fears and anger. that you don't think you have a choice.
Venerable, how do we actually negotiate our kind of way through this? Because I remember being in a very unhappy, dysfunctional relationship, and I was debilitated throughout my entire rest of my life in that relationship. And yet, when I look back at it, I learned so much from it, and it changed me as a person. But the whole time that I was in it, I couldn't function as a human being very well at all.
Well,
so
that's because, aren't you? Well, I mean, you're fortunate. Not everybody learns from their experiences. I mean, because you obviously have used other tools since then, including your Buddhist tools, that have helped you learn. But most people don't learn from their experiences like that. They just continue to have anger and blame. So it's up to having, so yeah. But I mean, the ideal would be, I mean, it's sort of like you've broken your leg, but you've never heard of surgery. So you walk around for 22 years without with a broken leg because you don't know there's a method to fix it. But later on you learn. So you learn from your foolish mistake. That's called practice. But most people don't learn from their experiences. They just keep blaming, try and get another boyfriend and try and see if the next one will do it. That's just because you're fortunate, Miffy, because you're able to learn from it. But I mean, surely the intelligent one is to learn. The mistake to learn is that you didn't know it then. You don't put yourself down because you didn't know then. At least you learn from it now. That's just fantastic. But I mean, best if you have that knowledge before you start. I mean,
and then if it's happening to us now, then how do we know like what our ability to withstand all the difficulties is without just like kind of one day tipping over the edge and having stayed in the relationship
what I'm talking about.
too long?
That's what I'm saying. We should have to decide whether we're going to stay or not. I mean, that's why my friends in prison, this is why it's such a powerful example. They don't have the luxury to say, I don't like it in here, can you please give me the key? They don't have that luxury, but they know they can change their minds. But when we always think I'm free, but I'm not realizing I'm not free when I can't even decide. I just keep going back to John like a moth to a flame. And why do I do that? Because I'm afraid, because I've got fear what people think of me. I'm worried I mightn't get anything better. So I'm misusing John. I'm actually really misusing John by just getting what I want. It's called totally being selfish. Being afraid and being a victim is called being selfish. I'm not trying to be mean to us because you can't make a decision. You're too afraid to say, I've got the power to leave. That's what you've got to do. That's intelligent, to leave that job if you can't handle it. No, I know I can't leave the job. I mightn't get another job. Well, you could change your mind and see it as a good job. No, I can't do that either. That's my point. So we stay paralyzed. That's how we go mad. We've got to it's very hard to be responsible. It's easier to say these words, but most people, it might take years to get to the courage to be able to see you've even got a choice. That's how, like you just said, debilitated. Because you weren't aware of your mind.
So is it then better for us to actually leave the relationship? Is it easier to work on our own mind when we're... You've
got to know where you're at. You've got to know where you're at. You've got to know what you can handle. If you're a bodhisattva level person, you've done all this work, you've given up attachment and anger, and you would rather live with a person you don't like, because you're going to, but they will think that you totally adore them, and you do, but it's not based on attachment. It's based on patience and wisdom and clarity. In other words, my friends in prison who are happy, we think they're demented. I mean, my friend Mitch on death row in Kentucky, I always quote him, this southern boy, this big, tall, white southern boy who was in a shootout with his friend Leaf, who's also in death row. They're both there together. He's a Catholic. Mitch is a Buddhist. They've both been there 30 years, doing all their appeals. They were typical guys. They were dealing with drugs. They were on drugs themselves. There was a shootout. People die. Guess what? If the guns, people are going to die. So they're on death row. 30 years of appeals. These poor working class boys. He's now a grandfather. He's a happy human being. He's joyful, funny, hilarious. All the guys on death row live in their red jumpsuits. And they live in isolation together. So he's got these 40 guys who are his family now, these psychopaths, these maniacs. There are maniacs around who are deluded people. They're his friends now. He's their support. He loves them. He's a content human being. He does 2 or 3 hours of practice every day. He makes little arty things that sends to people. He writes to his old mummy and daddy 2 hours away. They visit him like once a year because 2 hours is too far to go or whatever. He's a happy guy living in this garbage dump. He's living in a garbage dump, And he's getting ready to be executed. I'm ready for that electric jolt, he said. He cracks jokes about getting killed. So he's a happy guy. He's not happy because he's got a nice house. He's not happy because he's got nice clothes. He's not happy because he's got nice friends. He's not happy because he's got a family. None of those. He's living in hell, but he's a happy guy. So how an amazing experience. What an amazing example. I'm not trying to make him a saint, That's what...
So our skills are developed from actually being in difficulties.
I think the depth of our attachment is such that we don't really begin to practice until bad things happen, because it's easy to be happy when good things happen, and we fool ourselves that that's really, aren't I lucky? We say, aren't I happy? No, it's because your attachment's getting what you want. But as soon as attachment doesn't get what it wants, as soon as the bad thing happens, as soon as John farts instead of not farting, as soon as the boss is mean instead of not mean, as soon as the weather's too hot instead of cold, that second is the distress of attachment being thwarted, and aversion arises. But that's, you see, we don't think we're being angry, but aversion is a mild word, is the basic state of mind that's underneath anger, annoyance, irritation, upset, frustrated, anxious, worried, stressed, despairing, and depression. They are all on the spectrum of thwarted attachment. But we only think anger when you shout and yell. No, you don't have that kind of style, Biffy. Yours is more internalized. So you were despairing and miserable and depressed that whole time, because that's yours is more internalized aversion, because your attachment wasn't getting what it wanted. So you sat there stuck like a big lump, not knowing what the hell to do. Whereas I would have probably punched or killed the mother, understand? Or run away. I ran away. I got the hell out. As soon as it was uncomfortable, I was gone like the wind. I couldn't sit and do what you did. I would have gone completely berserk. So we're all different styles, you understand, of dealing with the thwarted attachment. But when we can be happy, be a content person within your own mind, not dependent on the external, that's when we only begin that practice, when we start being happy when bad things happen. It really is true. It's like the most advanced level, but it's really only then we start to practice.
So Cassandra Bennett's asked this fantastic question. So what then is real love and not attachment?
Very simple. That's why we have to understand the Buddhist analysis of the mind. This is so fundamental that it's not how we talk in our culture, okay? So there's the deluded, neurotic, distorted, fear-based, I-based, self-centered states of mind. And don't get guilty when you hear that. And everybody's got those. Then we've got the virtuous, valid, appropriate, positive states of mind. We right now have them mixed together like a big soup, and we cannot tell the difference. So so then for us now, if you mainly had attachment and aversion and jealousy and depression and anxiety and not much love and compassion and forgiveness and generosity, you'd be what the world calls a psychopath. That's exactly what a psychopath is, our term for it. A person who's absorbed utterly in their own needs and their own self, and has not even no interest in others, but can't even see others except in terms of their ability to satisfy my needs. We've all got that. But the interesting part is the love we have and the compassion we have, and I'll describe the difference, they mitigate our attachment. They soften our attachment. So we can't tell the difference. But they are like chalk and cheese. They're completely and utterly different states of mind. And that's why we have to have this ability, first intellectually to describe them how they are, and then experientially to notice the difference. And this is profoundly difficult because our minds are imbued with attachment, and it's mixed with love. So, okay, attachment. If my attachment we know people like this, but this is what we mean by narcissistic. This is what we mean by selfish. This is what we mean by self-absorbed. It's just lots of attachment that is my needs hungrily being needed to be fulfilled. So if I've mainly got attachment for John, I will, attachment is like a honey-covered razor blade. I will learn to use my seduction to get what I want from John, to get his money, to get his sex, whatever it is I want from him. And it looks like he will think I love him. So what is attachment is totally self-centered, naturally self-centered. It's the voice of ego grasping. It's frantic to get what it wants. And often it's a honey-covered razor blade. It will use pleasant methods to seduce John. He will really think I adore him. I don't. I only want what I want from him. And we know about that. We see it in relationships. We see it in ourselves. It's shocking. But if I have love for John, that means I want John to be happy. Love is necessarily altruistic. The positive states of mind are altruistic necessarily. They're connected to another. The delusions are I-based. The virtues can be other-based. In other words, I've extended myself to encompass John, and love is wanting him to be happy. I see John happy and I'm delighted for John. It's not self-centered at all. But the trouble is we don't have love right now that isn't mixed with attachment, and it's so hard to see the difference. It's so hard to see the difference. And that's when we start to practice, we can begin to see that. Compassion is may he not suffer. But right now, this is the point when we learn the equanimity practice in the Bodhisattva path, and we start to do the job of developing love and compassion. This is where we really can see the difference between love and attachment. So right now, we've got friends, enemies, and strangers. There's no fourth category of beings in the universe. Why? Because they're the objects of the three main delusions. The object of attachment is what we call a friend. The object of aversion is what we call an enemy. And the object of ignorance, in this case of indifference, is like a stranger. So there's no fourth category on this planet. So what is attachment for John? Attachment over-exaggerates his deliciousness, believes he should make me happy, expects him to make me happy, I possess him as mine. All those, they're the manifestations of attachment. And that's what's called a friend. So as long as John fulfills my needs, I'm prepared, number two, to love him. So we do have love, but as Lama Zopa says, it's unstable. As we say, it's got strings attached. I'm prepared to want John to be happy, but he's got to do what I want. It's sort of obvious. If he keeps giving what I want, giving me money and feeding me and loving me and stroking me, I'm going to adore the man. I'm going to have such compassion for the man. It's easy to have love and compassion for the one you adore, the one you're attached to. It's easy. It's not difficult at all. It's easy. But people think, oh, Robina is so compassionate. No, I'm not. I'm getting what I want from him. I mean, it sounds very cruel to talk this way, but this is what attachment causes us to do. Now, the second he keeps doing what my attachment doesn't want, eventually I'll look at this wretched person next to me in the bed. Who the hell is this? I'll get the hell out of there or kill him or do whatever. Because my aversion now is now growing more than the attachment. So I do not love him anymore. I don't want him to be happy, and I couldn't care if the damn man suffers. That's how we are. So love and attachment are completely, totally, utterly, profoundly different states of mind. But they're so common in all of us that we just conflate them. That's the big tragedy. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so then in a difficult relationship or an abusive relationship, in a way, that's when becomes very clear how much we actually are attached to the person and how much we genuinely care about them, regardless of the difficulty of the relationship.
Well, that's where I think that, you just said abusive, okay? That means if you've decided you're going to stay in that relationship, that's the action of a very developed person. Otherwise, it's just like masochism, and it can look like. That's maybe your style. You were like a nice girl, right? In a sense, you weren't angry and shouting and yelling, or what?
Yeah, no, that's true.
That's what I'm trying to say. So that's what, some people who have aversion, so your attachment didn't get what it wanted because this person was abusive or whatever it was, but you sat there and you absorbed it. That's what quiet people do. You absorb the abuse, and that becomes depression and despair and hopelessness and fear. Whereas a person like my style, I don't absorb it at all. I will punch it right back. And there would have been violence in the relationship. And then I knew it was not beneficial, so I'd get the hell out of there because I couldn't stand the pain. Which is a good quality in a way. I didn't kill the person, and they didn't kill me. So we've got these different ways of doing it. And with your style, it's much harder to see the problem because it looks like, oh, I'm kind, Miffy, she's so kind and loves him and blah blah blah. And then he'll change one day, or he really does love me. This kind of talk we do, it's just a load of rubbish. That's what attachment says. Always thinking, oh, maybe he'll change, maybe he'll get better. And then, and I couldn't leave him, no, not possible. And it sounds like it's virtue, but it's not. It's just because you're afraid and got attachment and are fearful of knowing that you can make choices. This is what's so interesting, But if you have made the choice, that means already you've done some work of controlling your body and speech. You won't fight every time he says something you don't like. You've decided there's something worthwhile in this relationship. In other words, you've decided there's something in this for me to develop my qualities. That's the same as the job. Let's say the boss is a creep and your colleagues don't like you, but you make a decision at this moment in time, I can learn from doing this job. You can be conscious about that, Miffy, not just wait till later. And I've decided consciously, I'm going to work with this job. I'm going to get what I can from it. It will help me develop my mind. It'll help me become more self-confident. It'll help me get better at my profession. And you accept the reality, and you shut your mouth, and you don't criticize, and you don't moan. That's a profound level of practice if you can do that. But if you're not capable, then you leave it. If you're not capable, you leave it. Why sit there to be abused when you know how to work on your mind? That's what we do. We're hopeless. But so you can decide to stay with John because you know there's some karma there. I always quote my mother's friend, Sheila. It's time for our break. My mother was a Catholic, and her best friend, Sheila, and she was her best friend. They're both Catholics. And Sheila lived in where'd she live? In Heidelberg. You know Melbourne, don't you? Whatever. One of the, it was used to be a working class suburb. Now it's probably posh. Things change. And Sheila was poor, and her husband Reg, and he was a silver top taxi driver. He owned a bunch of silver top taxis, all the old-fashioned days of these taxis. And he's also, they're all dead now, it's okay. And he also was what they call an SP bookie. This is these funny Australian terms. He was like a I don't know how you say it, when you bet on the races, the horse racing, but you do it illegally. And they were illegal, all these illegal bookmakers, so he was one of those. And my father was a bit of an alcoholic, and he was Reg's friend. They drank together, and my father used to bet on the horses using Reg as his bloke, right? So that's how come Mummy, Mother, and Sheila met. Well, so Sheila was hilariously funny. She was a Catholic. She was as skinny as a rake. She smoked 80 Marlboros a day and just lived on tea and bread and butter. And she was this joyful, wonderful human being who loved God completely. And I mean it really sincerely. She was a joyful person the whole of her life. She had these 5 boys, and of course I loved going over there because get away from our family, so I like the boys, right? But it was like, it's a different kind of dysfunction from my family, right? And Reg would come home drunk. He was abusive to Sheila. He would drag her to the bed at noon and jump on her, but she was smoking her fag, waiting for him to finish. It was water off a duck's back for Sheila. Now people don't believe that. They think she's probably suppressing. She wasn't suppressing. God was in everybody as far as Sheila was concerned. She couldn't care less about ridiculous Reg. She just loved Reg for who he was, because God was in Reg. She put up with this nonsense, but it was nothing for her. As Lama Zopa says, where is the abuse if you don't feel abused? And she is a real example of that. And I used to go over to her house when I was a kid. I loved being with Sheila. If she was miserable and depressed and moaning, I wouldn't want to be anywhere near her, because she was a joyful, wonderful human being. And she did not suffer. She was a Catholic. She wasn't a Buddhist. So that was an example of a person who was able to interpret her experience, like my friend Mitch on death row, and see it as good. And so she got so much from it. Who has that developed? Most of us are not. We don't even trust that in our culture. Oh, she just suppressed. No, she didn't. She was an amazing woman. I love this woman. She was outrageous. She was hilariously funny. Reg was like nothing to her, but she loved him. She looked after her children. She lived in the same house as this silly old bloke who died of gout or something. I don't know. I'm joking now. I don't know. You can't die of gout, can you? Anyway, whatever. So you got to know where you're at, what you can handle. You can't pretend. And we have the courage to know if you can't handle John, and you know there's nothing there, you know there's nothing in it, you can't work with it, leave him. That already implies a pretty intelligent person. That already implies the ability to leave for the right reason, not because he's a monster. You leave it because you can't handle it, because you understand karma. You know you created the cause, but you know you can't handle. That's a wise, intelligent decision to make. Not because you hate John, not because the boss is a creep. You do it because when you understand karma and you understand your own mind, it brings a whole different way of seeing your life, and you become more accountable. You become more responsible. Does that make sense, people?
Yep. That's super clear.
Okay.
So maybe, Venerable, after the break, could you delve into karma then?
We can do that then, yeah, absolutely. So it's 8 p.m. for me. I'm going to do my practice now and get my bed ready, so at midnight when we stop I can hop into bed. And because some of you people know about this prayer-a-thon? Have you read about that, you people? I'll tell you. A while ago, a bunch of the monks and nuns decided we'd do a 24-hour recitation of the Heart Sutra.
Oh yes, we had that. We had
Chenrezig ran it. So one nun told Lama Zopa, he was very impressed. So of course he didn't just say, oh, that's good of you. He said, okay, now you got another job. So he's now made us do a 24-hour recitation of a particular wonderful prayer by some Sakya Lama of a few centuries ago, when there was some big epidemic at one big monastery and nothing worked, and he started reciting this prayer. Only about 4 verses, and it cured everybody. So we've got this prayer-a-thon, 24 hours every Saturday, starting from Indian time, for 24 hours every Saturday, monks and nuns leading 30-minute slots, and we've got to continue to do it until COVID-19 has finished on the planet. So it could be for 5 years, who knows? So I'm committed to do the 7 a.m. Santa Fe time, which is 11 p.m. Sydney coast. So what to do? But it's 7 a.m. Santa Fe, 10 a.m. in New York, 6 a.m. in San Francisco. I try to choose a time. And then it's also European time in the afternoon. And then in Australia, though, it's 11. It's about the only time you can get all the continents in one, you know. But New Zealand's like 1 a.m. That's the only one that's missing. So I'm doing, for the next foreseeable future, every Saturday at 11 p.m. Sydney time for 1 hour, leading this prayer and then mixture of Chen raising meditation and Om Mani Padme Hung's recitation. And it's to remove the sickness of the planet. So 24 hours a day, and it's for the foreseeable future. So there's a link. It'll be on my Facebook page. But you've heard of this, Miffy, haven't you?
Yeah, only from the nuns so far, but it hasn't been kind of publicised fully yet.
Okay, well that's what's happening. So anyway, so for me, I'm going to go to bed at midnight and hop up at 6:30 so I can do that by 7 o'clock. That's why I have my bed ready during my 2 hours break now. I'm going to do my practice. Okay, you people.
So thank you so much.
See you in 2 hours, darlings.